Hey, what's up guys? Vulkan here. Welcome to my channel where I teach you everything you need to know to get better at Clash Royale. So today I'm going to be sharing my top 5 tips to build the best possible deck you can with the card levels that you have. So a little bit of backstory as to why I decided to make this video is that I was pushing ladder So a little bit of backstory as to why I'm making this video is because I was pushing ladder on my second account, Volcano, and I managed to reach 2,000 in the world. But I reached that and I only have I only have 15 cards that are actually max. So that goes to show that you don't need to have all the max legendaries, epics, rares, and even commons to get high on ladder. You can do it, and I could probably push higher than this. I'm going to definitely try soon. I might even record a video doing it. But you can push high on ladder with almost any account. You could probably get higher if you just use the right deck. I started out using this deck, but what I found is that even by switching just a couple cards, I was able to push about 800 trophies higher using this than when I was using this deck, which isn't even a fully maxed deck, but just the underleveled miner, the underleveled spear goblins, and even the knight, because I couldn't use rascals because they're underleveled. That made all the difference to where I was stuck at like 6,000 trophies, and just by switching up my deck, I pushed up all the way to 6,800, and I still plan on pushing higher. So it just goes to show the power of using a good deck on ladder. So tip number 1 is to use mostly common cards. And the reason I say this is because commons are the easiest to level up, and basically with whatever deck you're using, you just want to use your highest level cards. Even one level can be night and day difference. Like it can be the difference between 200 trophies. If it's your whole deck this one level, it could be the difference between like 1,000 trophies. The level is very important. So you see all these common cards, and the only ones I wouldn't recommend using are, that's not a common, I wouldn't recommend using the elite barbarians. I wouldn't recommend the royal recruits. I guess if you have a high level firecracker, you can use it. Why not? It's a pretty good card. And then I would say fire spirits aren't the best, but even then they have their place. So really you can use any of these cards except for elite barbarians and royal recruits, and they will be successful in your deck. Okay, so moving on to tip number 2. With some cards, the levels aren't quite as important. So for example, with these 8 spells, you can use them even if they're under leveled. The log, 1 level under, will still kill a princess that's 1 level higher. The arrows will still kill a princess that's a level higher. The barb barrel, it won't, but it'll still kill goblins if it's 1 level lower. I think. Actually, I'm not sure about that, but I'm just going to assume for the purpose of this video that it does. Tornado, the level literally doesn't matter. Like, as long as it kills skeletons, you're pretty much good. Zap, same story. It still kills the skeletons, still kills spear goblins when it's underleveled. Graveyard, it doesn't do as much damage, but the level, yeah, isn't as important. And then Rocket, even like 2 levels under, it can kill just about anything but a Sparky, so you can use an underleveled rocket. And then these are some cards where the level, and then these are some troop cards where the level isn't quite as important. The skeletons, the ice spirit, the bat, you're mostly using for cycle anyway, so utility isn't really quite as important, and they all get one shot by zap anyway. The Sparky, the Mega Knight, and the giant skeleton, the thing is, like, technically they're not as strong, obviously, as if they were at the same level, but a lot of times, because they have a lot of splash damage potential, if you're facing not that good of an opponent, which is usually the case when you're in a lower arena, you're going to be able to get a lot of value, like a lot more value than if you're playing someone on high ladder. So a lot of times, these splash damage heavy cards that are also good in a high ladder are especially, well, they're also good in low ladder under level just because people clump up their troops a little bit more than they should. Tip number 3 is a really quick but really important tip, and that is that I'd recommend to put your 2 highest level spells in whatever deck you have. Sometimes you can even put in 3, but a lot of times you don't really want 1, usually you want 2. And the spells I would recommend basically never using are the poison and the lightning, because unless you have them like at an equal level as the witches or wizards that you're playing against, they're not going to work very well, just because like a poison won't be able to kill a musketeer. So tip number 3 is to put your 2 highest level spells in whatever deck you're using. If you have equally high level spells, you can kind of choose, what makes more sense in whatever scenario it is, but you don't want to be using, for example, an underleveled fireball. You don't want to be using an underleveled poison or an underleveled lightning, because they're not going to kill stuff. So at that point, you're better off just using like log and zap and not even having a big spell, or using snowball and zap, or zap and arrows. Yeah, I would just say make sure you're not using an underleveled spell that isn't going to kill stuff, because at that point it's just a dead card in your hands. Tip number 4 is going to be popular cards that you should avoid. Just because a lot of people use a card doesn't mean it's a good card to use. There's a lot better cards that you could be using and be having more success with, but a lot of people use them just because they're easy to use and they're kind of low skill. So the way I like to think about this is don't use negative elixir trade cards. And what that means is, for example, the minion horde. It dies to arrows, and a lot of people on ladder are using arrows, and if it's under leveled, it even dies to zap. So you have to be really careful with minion horde. First of all, you have to have a high level minion horde so it's not dying to zap, and then second of all, if you are using minion horde, you need to be using it in a deck that has a lot of other bait cards in it, like at least 3 other bait cards, because if it doesn't, then they're just going to get arrows and always have a positive, or they're just going to arrows your minion horde and always have a positive elixir trade on you. And then you can go to things like Goblin Gang. You don't want to be using Goblin Gang, Princess, Goblin Barrel, or Dark Goblin if it dies to zap. It's a negative elixir trade, and you're better off using a different cycle card, such as Skeletons or Ice Spirit. You also don't want to be using the ranged attackers like the Musketeer, the Witch, and the Wizard. Witch and Wizard just aren't very good cards in general, but even with a Musketeer, which is a very good card, you don't want to be using it if it's under leveled, because if it gets one shot by a fireball, it's a negative elixir trade. So at that point, you're just better off using archers or minions. And then Ice Golem, you don't want to use it if it's not a high enough level to kill enemy bats and enemy skeletons. At that point, you're just better off using a knight. And a lot of times, because it's easier to level up knight than Ice Golem, I would say knight is the Walmart's Ice Golem. Any deck that you have Ice Golem in, you can basically just sub knight in, like for example 2.9 or 2.6, Expo or Hog. Any deck like that, you're probably better off using the knight unless you have, an equal level to Ice Golem. I would also recommend you don't use the Furnace if it's under leveled, because if the Fire Spirit is 1 level under the enemy tower, then there's going to be one shot by the tower, and it kind of ends up just being a dead card in your hand. The 5th and final tip for this video is going to be to use your highest level win conditions in whatever deck you're using. For example, as you can see here, I'm running this Royal Giant Mortar deck, and the reason why is because, well, quite frankly, they're the only 2 win conditions I have maxed. So it really is important. You can kind of make these other win conditions work. Like, you could still do decently well in ladder, but you're not going to reach your maximum trophy potential if you're not using your highest level win conditions. So now that I gave you the top 5 tips for building decks, let me show you guys some actual decks that you could use or modify to best suit your card levels. I showed you guys the Royal Giant Mortar deck that I was using, but let me also show you a different variation that you could also use. So this variation is kind of just a modified Hog Rider deck, because there's the popular like Macarius Mortar deck. So basically, since I didn't have Spear Goblins leveled up, I decided to put Goblins in this deck instead of the Log. But then I found that I kept losing the Log bait, so I decided to stick in Log, and it actually worked pretty well. Like I think I hit like 6,500 with this deck. The only problem with it was that it kept facing people who had arrows in their deck, and so the minion horde was kind of useless. but it could be a good deck. You could even take out Fireball and sub some stuff. But so basically the point is that depending on your card levels, this could be a good base for a deck. You could just modify a couple cards and switch it to suit your needs. We also have this deck, which is a deck that's actually in the top 200, and it only has 1 legendary and 1 rare. So if you happen to have, a high level log and a high level rocket for whatever reason, and you have all these other cards maxed, then you could actually like push really high with this deck. And you could also, sub in the Fireball for the rocket, or you could sub in a Zap for the snowball, or even like the Barbarian Barrel for the log, or even arrows for the log. And it would work, but it wouldn't be quite as good. But if you have the card levels needed, then you could definitely try using that deck. So the second best free-to-play win condition is definitely going to be like the Hog Mortar, and this is the most popular version of this deck. The only thing about this version that I don't like is that the Fireball, well, if you have an under-level Fireball, it's not going to work out very well. Like if you can't Fireball Zap a Wizard, then you're just going to get absolutely annihilated by like Wizard and Witch players. So you have to be careful about that. You can't really use this deck if you don't have like a high-level Fireball. And also, well, you actually could try putting Rascals in instead of the Mini Horde. I was thinking about this because a lot of people in mid-level arenas use arrows. So if you're facing a lot of arrows, the Rascals would probably actually be better than the Mini Horde. And maybe they'd be better anyway. Maybe it would be like an easier deck to play, especially if your Fireball isn't a high level. Keeping on the topic of Hog, I actually wouldn't recommend playing 2.6 because it's really hard to upgrade your Musketeer and it's really hard to upgrade your Log. But if you happen to have, a high, and also it's hard to upgrade your Ice Golem. If you happen to have a high level Ice Golem, Musketeer, or Log, then sure, use 2.6. But if you don't, I'm guessing most of you guys probably would have this deck leveled up more, or just easier to level up. So you can actually give this deck a try over 2.6, or even like if you have a high level Musketeer, you can sub it into this deck. But something like this could actually work a lot better. And then there's also the Big Dream deck, which is just as easy to level up. A guy named Big Dream uses, or he doesn't really play anymore, but he's pushed top 200 multiple times with this deck on ladder. So it's a really solid deck, and if you're looking for something to switch it up, feel free to give this a try. And believe it or not, I actually think Graveyard is like the 3rd best free-to-play win condition, or I guess kind of 4th if you consider Mortar win condition, just because the level of the Graveyard doesn't really matter that much. It's more about the support cards. And for example, with Graveyard, it's actually more important to upgrade your Poison than it is to upgrade your Graveyard. And the reason I have Freeze in this deck is because, since, as I was saying, if you have an underlevel Poison, it's not really going to work out that well. But an underlevel Freeze isn't as big of a deal. So it's okay to use, like, especially Graveyard Freeze if you don't have a max Poison. And something like this could work out really well. You could sub it into the deck depending on your card levels. You could even use a different building. You could even not use a building at all and use a tornado, and something like that could work. Now the next 2 win conditions are win conditions that are really popular, but I honestly don't think are that good because they're really level dependent. And that would be, I guess they're okay, but you have to like really hardcore focus upgrading these win conditions and cards, otherwise it's not going to be good. This is a really popular deck, but honestly it's really hard to upgrade because it has 2 legendaries, it has an epic, and 2 rares. It's just not that good. I would actually recommend, if you want to use log bait, use something like this because it's a lot easier to upgrade. You got the arrows instead of the log. You got the goblin, well, I guess you got the dark goblin instead of the princess, so no legendaries. It kind of depends what you have leveled up and what's easier for you to level up, so feel free to use whatever you want. And I would say you don't necessarily even need a big spell in this deck. Like, you don't really need the rocket. Honestly, you could almost put Fireball in this deck, but you kind of want the rocket. If you have a high level princess, I'd actually put like the princess in instead of the rocket. But like, you don't have to copy the meta logbait deck. Feel free to switch it up as your card levels, like, feel free to switch it up if you have a dark goblin leveled up higher than a princess and stuff like that. You can put in a Valkyrie if you have a higher level Valkyrie than Knight. You can even put in a cannon. Like don't be afraid to try out different stuff. And then with Expo, if you don't have a high level Ice Golem, the Knight is honestly not even that much worse. Like, it's only going to put you 100 or 200 trophies lower than if you're using the ice golem, if even that. Like, the knight really isn't that bad. I'm pretty sure there's people who even get top 200 with the knight. So yeah, feel free to like use the knight here. You don't really want to switch out anything else in this deck. The log is super important, the expo is super important, and so is a fireball, but you can definitely try switching out the knight. You could even try switching up the archers, and it's not that big of a deal. And then my final pick, and this is what I consider to be an underrated free-to-play win condition, is the balloon. Because, and the balloon itself is really hard to upgrade, but you can focus upgrade the balloon. Like, you can just request a lot of balloons like every Sunday and only request balloons, and then use like only commons for the rest of the deck. Or, you know, you can use a freeze, you can put in a fireball if you have a high level fireball, you can put in a miner if you happen to have a high level miner. But really the core of this deck is the balloon and the commons. So you could actually get away with, and I used to do this a lot, I would use like level 12 balloon and then max commons and like a level 10 freeze or something. Like, and I used to push top to 100 ladder with that like 2 years ago. So it's definitely a viable deck choice, and as long as you have a high level balloon, it can work out quite well for you. So yeah, feel free to take any of the decks that I showed you in this video and modify it according to your card levels. Take the tips that I told you in the video and use it to make a deck that works best for your account. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and Vulkan out.